Hey guys, and thank you for tuning in. This is Who Psychoanalyzes the Watchmen. I'm Heather Ness. Thank you guys for tuning in to the MomoCon live stream. This is a great thing that MomoCon has been putting together since we aren't able to, meet together in person. This was kind of Who Psychoanalyzes the Watchmen. It was kind of a last minute idea that I had from watching the HBO series, finally, binge watching it in a couple of days. And I think like a lot of us could probably relate to binge watching in quarantine right now. So this was one of my quarantine binges, and I wanted so much to talk to you guys about it. So thank you for tuning in. Again, I'm Heather Ness. I go to different cons in the Atlanta area, like MomoCon, DragonCon, and some others. I usually sport my moniker Super Psych. So maybe you've gone to one of my Psychology of panels before, but this is going to be similar to that. So let's jump in. Let's see what we got. So this series, or this panel that I got here, is going to focus more on the HBO series, Watchmen. It is going to be pretty spoiler heavy if you haven't watched it already. And only a little bit going to get into the graphic novel. So Watchmen in general, like the whole franchise, the whole story, or the whole world, deals with some really deep themes. And I liked the HBO Watchmen series because, one, it was a more modern take. The graphic novel was written sometime in the 1980s. I forget exactly the year, by Alan Moore. And it was very, very pertinent for that time. And times have sort of changed. So, this HBO series was able to, I think, talk about those themes from the original graphic novel, but make it more applicable to what we're seeing in the world today, especially what we're seeing in American society today. So, first of all, I felt like the series Watchmen asked the question, what's the difference between the KKK, the police, and superheroes? And the answer could be very, very simple, in that is like, well, the difference is that some are superheroes, some are heroes, and some are very much villains. But that's where Watchmen goes, right, who's who? And that's where it gets a little bit messy. So to answer the question, what's the difference between these different groups? They show in the series the way that they are similar. And the way that they are similar is that they all wear masks. So now in the HBO series, the shtick, I guess, that's a little bit different from how things actually work in real life, is that the cops, I don't know if all in American society or if it's just in Oklahoma, but the police officers are able to cover up their faces, so that they're now like vigilantes, superheroes. They're able to cover up their face and hide their identity. But the difference is, in this storytelling, is that cops are the good guys and vigilantes or superheroes are outlawed. So they made all of these groups, the KKK, the police, superheroes, all of them are wearing masks. So what does a mask do? And I'm going to talk about that in kind of like a metaphorical sense. What it does in a figurative sense, but also what it does in a literal sense. So what it does is it gives us anonymity. We're able to cover up our true identities. It allows us to become someone else besides who we actually are in society. It gives us a different persona. So for example, one of the police officers, Angela, who's really kick-ass, She in society she owns a bakery shop. But in actuality, who Angela is, like her essence of herself, is the furthest thing from just like this sweet lady who owns this very quaint, cute bakery shop. She puts on her persona of Sister Night as a police officer, and she goes out and she beats a confession out of people. So this, a mask gives her or allows her to have a different persona. So one thing to kind of like help us tease apart this idea is this psychological experiment that happened in again, I don't know the exact date because I'm just really bad with that, but it happened in the 1970s, called the Stanford prison experiment. You might have heard that. If you ever take like an intro to psych class, it's one of the staples that people cover. And the main researcher there was Philip Zimbardo. And Zimbardo did a lot of not cool, unethical things when he put together this experiment. So keep that in mind. Secondly, though, the premise of the experiment is that he took a group of white, traditionally college age, so like 18 to 20 something, men from this school, from this university, and he divided them up randomly into these groups, and he gave each group a role. So the one group was that they got to be the prison guards, and these other ones got to be the prisoners. And so he gave them these roles. He told them, he gave like the prison guards had like their nightstick. They had those very stereotypical aviator sunglasses that cops are shown to wear in movies. Who knows if they actually wear them. I think they had like different clothes and things. Prisoners were put into very drab clothing, like prisoners are like wear, and then they were only referred to by their prisoner number, so their names were taken away. So these two groups of men were given these roles, and when they were given these roles, they were also given these expectations, and we have these expectations, one from the researcher who was putting this all together, but also like we just kind of have in the back of our heads how we think a prisoner is supposed to act, how we think a prison guard is supposed to act. So he took like these very like random guys from this university who like they didn't particularly have like any type of aggression in their background. They were just your average Joe Schmoes. But when he gave these roles of prison guards to some of the men, they changed. They became very different. They acted very differently than what they would in their regular life. They became incredibly aggressive and did awful things to the other people who were prisoners. And so like Zimbardo's plan for this whole experiment was that it was going to go on for weeks, but I think he cut it off after just like only a few days. So in one hand, there's a few different sides to a mask. You have the literal sense of the mask, that it's actually covering you up, like a physical, literal mask. But then you can also think of a mask as just kind of like this persona or this social role that you put on. So for example, say even myself, so like my background is that, I have a master's degree in clinical psychology, and that master's degree allowed me to then be an instructor at a university for a few years, for about 4 years, and then I decided I wanted to go further on in my school, and my education, and I went back to school and became a doctoral student at Georgia State University, where I'm at right now. So at one point in my life, I had the role of a professor, and I acted a certain way in that role. And then I went back to school, and now my role is student. And you act a little different if you're a professor or if you're a student. Not incredibly different, but like there's some nuances there. So we have in our lives different roles that we play. Sometimes I'm a wife. Well, I'm always a wife, but like I'm interacting as a wife or as a daughter. Those are different roles, and you act differently in each one. So, with wearing a mask, putting on a mask or putting on a persona, it can go a couple of different ways. On one hand, you have the Stanford prison experiment where it went incredibly badly. Like they were given the role of a prison guard, and then they became very aggressive. You have with the KKK, who put on these very cowardly hoods, and they have these same beliefs whether or not they're wearing the hoods and how they're interacting in society, but somehow putting on that hood and getting in a group of their brothers, and having that anonymity allows them to carry out these heinous, aggressive acts that they can't if they're just like, going about their life as a banker or something. So on that side, the mask is kind of a bad thing, you could kind of say, but you also have, I'm sure so many of you are probably really missing it right now, but being able to cosplay and putting on, whether or not it's actually a mask, but getting to like role play as this character that you think is really cool, or maybe that you admire. I'm not a cosplayer myself, but my understanding is that when you put on this other this costume, that one that you put an incredible lot of work into and is all very cool, but also like you're kind of putting on the persona of this character, and maybe that makes you feel a little bit different. So that can be a cool thing, if you put on a hero and maybe it makes somebody who's kind of shy or inhibited feel cool about getting out and going to a con with a bunch of other like-minded people and making new friends, and then that's a positive thing. So these masks, this sort of anonymity or putting on a different persona, it can go a couple of different ways. There's a psychologist, I'm sure a lot of you have heard of Freud, and if you've taken an intro to psych class ever, you might have heard of this guy too, but his name is Carl Jung, and he says that figuratively, we all wear a mask. We all put forth this persona in society, and this hides our real self, very much like Angela putting forth this persona of, I'm just this cool, unassuming baker, I got my husband and my 3 kids, and nope, not causing any problems over here, that's just me. But really, her true self is very angry. She's very angry with how the world works and all the different things that has happened to her. And she, through her other self, as Sister Night, is able to express that. So, there's also in the show the character of the Gamekeeper, and he wears a mask. Not really to cover up his identity, because you can really tell that he is just another one of these clones things that Dr. Manhattan has made. But he wears a mask for a very specific purpose, and the purpose is to make him more cruel. So again, this goes back to the Stanford prison experiment. This goes back to the KKK, or in the show they have the Cyclops, they have the Cavalry, who all of them who wear a mask. Putting on this mask and having this sort of anonymity. Masks make men more cruel, and he does it for a purpose, to make Adrian Veidt stay on his paradise planet. There's another side to masks that I kind of wanted to talk about, and they sort of work as a Rorschach test. So now Rorschach he doesn't come into the show because he was killed in the graphic novel, but Rorschach has a mask, the Cavalry wear it now, where it looks like an Inkblot test. So there are these psychological tests called the Rorschach Inkblot test, and they're just they're symmetrical, but they're not really images of anything. They're just blobs. And they are a type of projective test, and a projective test is like, here's this image, some kind of stimulus. What do you see? And the point of them isn't really there's no right or wrong answer, because there's nothing really going on in the image. They're just vague and blobs. But the point is, people will talk about, they will project things that are kind of going on with themselves and their own beliefs and maybe their past, or like something that's going on with their mental health onto this image. So, in a way, masks sort of work as a Rorschach test. So if you see someone in a mask, what is your gut reaction when you see that person? So for example, and I know the show was not written for this, because the show was written and filmed and aired before this COVID-19 epidemic. But it worked really well, but it seemed very appropriate to watch it during this time, because what we're also seeing as people are going into stores or doing their essential business or essential work while wearing masks, we're seeing incidences of violence against Black men and Asian Americans who are just wearing these respiratory masks. It made me think of the quote from the show, "White men in masks are heroes, Black men in masks are scary," made me think of what is going on with, there was this African American doctor who was trying to help other people, and he was wearing his mask, and he was arrested. He was stopped by a cop, because surely an African American man in a mask must be up to no good. They must be hiding something, and we should be scared of them. Or an Asian American wearing these masks, they must be carrying the virus, and they're hiding that or something. So it's not about what's true. It's not about what's true. It's about what is your gut reaction when you see another person in a mask. That's what says the most about you as an individual. We'll talk more about Wade in a little bit, but Wade's character or persona, Lookingglass, is very similar to Rorschach, in that instead of it being like an Inkblot, it is just a reflection. So instead of seeing this blob of ink or whatever, when you look at him, you see a reflection of yourself. So what does that make you feel? Somewhat like a projective test, but the stimulus is yourself. So Watchmen, I think the series at its very essence, if we strip away the mask part as well, it asks us to question our definition of a hero. So Angela's hero was the chief of police, and he had a Klan's hood in his closet. The very popular and charismatic senator of Oklahoma is a leader in the cavalry. And these people who are in power, like the chief of police or the senator, people who are supposed to be the good guys, they justify being in these groups, these horrible groups, these horribly racist and violent groups, to keep the peace from within. That's how they justify it. But they're not making any substantive change. They're keeping the status quo, or even using that violence for their own gain. Dr. Manhattan's liberation of Vietnam, it happens in the graphic novel, the liberation of Vietnam is compared to the Tulsa Massacre. And in the show, the cavalry, who are very Klan-like, and they have a connection to the Klan, to Cyclops. Their symbol, in addition to wearing like Rorschach masks, and they quote his journal, so you can see that they're kind of putting up Rorschach on some kind of like pedestal, or kind of idolizing him, I guess, as some sort of passed away hero. But in addition to that kind of blatant homage, the Calvary's Cyclops symbol that you see later on in the show, they not only include Rorschach imagery, but they have the symbol from Ozymandias's his eye symbol from his breastplate, and surrounding that is Dr. Manhattan's atom symbol. So you have this horrible racist group who everyone like kind of agreed, like everyone's on the same page that these are bad guys. These are the bad guys. But they are paying homage to who was considered the heroes. So it kind of goes back to this question of, well, what's the difference then? What is the difference between these who we think of as heroes and who do we think of as villains? Because the line between them has not only become blurred, we've almost taken it all away. So the other part about masks, and because there's a lot to get in with it, is that they're used for protection, literally and figuratively, right? You know, we're wearing a mask to protect ourselves and others from the virus, but we can also put on, or Angela literally wears a mask to protect herself, because if people knew that she was a cop, then she would be in danger of the Calvary. She and her family would be in danger. But that's a literal sense. But in a figurative sense, she is protecting herself with her mask from all the trauma that she has experienced in her lifetime. And with Angela, it was like one thing right after another. It was just can lead, such an amazing amount of hurt. So we can put on a mask or a persona to pretend like we're not hurting. So we can put on a mask, a new persona, and become cruel. Or we can put on this mask and become someone confident and heroic, like cosplay, or we're playing a role in D&D, or children playing dress up. They're practicing these roles and trying to figure out who they are. Or we can put on a figurative mask, a persona, to pretend like we're all okay. And to a certain extent, that's an okay thing, because you could be experiencing whatever kind of hurt, but man, like sometimes you just got to get through your day, and you got to be able to go to work, or you got to be able to go to school, you got to be able to function. And so sometimes you put on this persona that everything's cool, and you get your stuff done. The problem comes from never taking off that persona and never dealing with whatever hurt that you're dealing with. We'll come back to this quote a little bit later on, but Angela's grandfather says healing can't happen under a mask. We can kind of like put on a persona or this facade that everything's cool, kind of like how we slap on a Band-Aid if we get cut. But unlike a Band-Aid, healing just doesn't happen on its own. Not emotional healing. You kind of got to address it. But then there's also the part with a mask or putting on this persona. There's this other psychological test. It's called the marshmallow test. So in this, the researchers get children, and say a child comes into a room and there's a marshmallow on a plate, and the researcher says to the child, okay, I'm going to go leave the room for a little while, about like 15 minutes. If you eat the marshmallow, that's all you can have. But if you don't eat the marshmallow until I come back, I'll give you 2 marshmallows. And so then they leave the room, and there's usually like funny videotape of a child like trying to figure out, what do I want to do about this marshmallow situation? And sometimes children, if they'll just eat the marshmallow. Some like really agonize over it. Some they cover up their eyes. If I don't look at the marshmallow, it's a lot easier to not eat it. So it's kind of like this experiment or psychological study in self-control with children. But other people have done the same test, and they've told them, think of your favorite superhero, or wear the Superman cape. Now don't eat the marshmallow. And when kids either put on the cape, or even if they don't even put on the cape, if they did follow-up experiments where they're like, just think about what you think Superman would do, they had an easier time having more self-control, because they're like, well, Superman would wait. Superman would wait for that second marshmallow, and it helped them do that. So we have these different sides of a mask where it can make someone, like a mask makes someone cruel, and we've seen that. But it can also make someone stronger, and it can be protective, and it can be helpful, and it can make you feel stronger and braver. So what's the difference? And the show doesn't actually offer an answer to that, and my answer to that is very tentative. I don't think I'm necessarily an expert in it, but I think it's the persona we choose to put on is the difference. Like, there's a difference between a child putting on a Superman cape and feeling invincible, and a grown person, a coward, putting on a Klan hood and hurting another person. So I think it's what is the persona that we choose to put on, and the potential consequences from it. So, kind of switching gears, but we'll keep talking about a mask and what it means to each of these different characters. But one of the characters that I wanted to talk about was the character Will Reeves, and that's Angela's grandfather. So he becomes the Hooded Justice, one of the first mass vigilantes in the Watchmen world. He's the one who's kind of driving this whole thing with this trend towards becoming a vigilante, and so. His storyline is very interesting because he was there at the Tulsa massacre. He lost his parents and he lost his home. But we first see him, he's sitting alone in a movie theater. And also anyone who's tuning into this who's from the Georgia area, I'm tuning into you guys from Macon, Georgia, and this theater is that we see Will Reeves in is the historic Douglas Theater that we have in Macon, so that was kind of cool to watch. But anyways, so Will Reeves is sitting in this theater as a child, as a little boy, and he's watching probably a movie that he's watched I don't even know how many times, and it's of this hero that he identifies with, who kind of unmasks figuratively the sheriff in this town. So the people that he has been double crossing them, and they're all ready to hang this guy up. And the hero that Will Reeves identifies with says, there's going to be no mob justice today. Trust in the law. And so he's learned the lesson of trust in the law. So he grows up, and even though he's living in Brooklyn in the 1930s, the 1940s, somewhere around in there, which isn't nowhere in America in the 1930s or in the 1940s was super great for black people, but he's living in Brooklyn or this area in New York in that time, and he wants to join the police force. And so he joins the police force even though these people are adamantly against him. All these white cops are adamantly against him joining the force, but he trusts in the law, he trusts in the system, and he wants to do good within the system. But then these cops who are also in the Klan, who are in this not the Klan, but they kind of have this weird Cyclops operation going on. They capture him, they hang him up on a tree, which is how he gets this noose around his neck. The Klan is obviously known for wearing their white hoods, but they would put these black hoods on their victims. And so he's wearing this black hood, and this news from being hung up by the Klan, but they do let him go. They cut him down, but they're just trying to intimidate him. They want to intimidate him so he's not pressing into their Cyclops' operation or whatever. So that he, I guess, knows his place. And so he sees, as he's walking back from this whole thing, and he's holding the hood, and he still has the noose around his neck. He sees a couple being attacked. So he puts back on the black hood, the mask that they put him in, and he saves this couple. At that moment, he becomes Hooded Justice. And there's a few things that's going on here. There's a few things. One is that he has taken this black hood that is a racist symbol, and he takes ownership of it and uses it, which is something that we've seen before. We've seen before in African American culture or language, and it's okay because he can do that. He has taken the ownership of it, of this incredibly racist symbol. The second thing is, so we have a white couple being attacked by a white man. If Will had not put that hood on and had hidden his identity, if he had just decided to beat the crap out of this bad guy, but a white bad guy, during that day and time, possibly today, he would have paid the price for that. He could not, as a black man in that time, lashed out and have been seen as a hero. He could not have protected this white couple in this way and have been seen as a hero if he had not covered his mask. So, outwardly to society, he has to play a certain role, and the role is that he follows all the rules. He doesn't hurt any white people. He is a polite police officer who knows his place. And that's what he has to do to survive in the society. The hood of Hooded Justice allows him to, Will's mad. He's lost his family. He has seen this aggression, this violence against his people over and over and over and over again, against himself over and over again. He's mad. The hood is the only way that he can express his anger and protect himself. So this kind of also leads to this other really tragic progression where he is this, as a child, he watches this film that is made by white folk about how a black man should appropriately protect other white people. A little bit of propaganda? Sure, yes. He joins the police force, who are white people who should care about him, but they don't. They don't care about him. They even hurt him. Okay? So he decides to seek justice with a hood and not a badge. So he joins the Minutemen, who are also white people in mask, kind of similarly to the Klan and Cyclops, who also don't care about him. They don't care about him, and they don't care about his crime-fighting agenda. They're just using him as a prop. He is told to trust in the law, and he's constantly duped. And it's tragic because he does trust. He goes from group to group to group, trusting that this time it'll be different, and it never ever is. So he has a few masks. He has a literal one as Hooded Justice, so he puts that one on. Allows other people encourages them to think that he is this white person, which I don't know why people would look at someone in a black mask and with a noose around their neck and think, oh, that must be a white person. But okay. So he has this literal one, his hooded justice, and then he has his polite social one that's covering up his anger. And then they kind of throw this into the show, but they don't really address it. He has a mask as a straight husband, and I don't know if he is necessarily homosexual. Maybe he's bisexual, pansexual, I don't know. But he at least is... He's somewhat having this mask of being a 100% straight husband. And so his storyline kind of circles back from he was hung up in this very specific tree. He was hung up in this tree by the Klan members, by the Klan cop, Cyclops people, and then he hangs the chief of police, who is part of Calvary, using the Cyclops' mesmerizing technology. So it comes full circle, and I think it kind of makes you ask, okay, well, if this guy who's had all these horrible things happen to him uses the same methods that his enemies are using, what's the difference? And that one's not something that I'm necessarily going to give forth a judgment on, but I think it is something that it asks you to kind of figure out, okay, well, does he stop being a hero because he's doing the same thing that his enemies are doing, that the bad guys are doing, or, do they have it coming to them? I don't have an answer for that for you. In the graphic novel, though, there's this character, the comedian, who's assaulting this woman, Silk Spectre, and the hooded justice stops him from assaulting her, which is great. It's heroic. It's great. But then he's not like sympathetic or nice to the woman, to Silk Spectre. He's kind of victim blaming, very much so. He tells her to put some clothes on as if it was her idea to take them off. So again, there's a blurred line, and I personally am very sympathetic to the character Will Reeves, but there's this blurred line between hero and villain. There's another point. There's another interesting angle that the show brings up. So during Will's time as a police officer, and this is when he discovers the Cyclops' mesmerizing technology. What they're doing is they're playing these strobe lights, like what Will has here, through a movie theater screen. And so they use this technology in a black theater, only on black audiences. And what it does is it kind of hypnotizes them, mesmerizes them to be aggressive to each other. So there's another massacre that happens on black people, but by black people, but they're manipulated to do it. So cops arrive on the scene, and all these white cops are just like, yeah, that's their nature. They're just aggressive and can't control themselves, and it's just awful. And Will goes in, and he's actually starting to, he talks to people like they're people, because they're his people, and tries to figure out what's actually going on. No one else questions that a theater full of people just all of a sudden starts being heinously violent towards each other, except this one police officer. So and that's how he finds about the Cyclops' strobe technology. There is or was a I believe he's passed away now. I'm not actually sure about that, but you can look him up. Dr. Amos Wilson is a psychologist, and he's wrote a number of books that I found personally life-changing for understanding society. But he wrote one book that is called Understanding Black Adolescents Male Violence, and he's written another one, Black on Black Violence. And so, these are longer books, and there's a lot of nuances going on here, and he goes into like an incredible dialogue about it, and talking about all the systemic institutional issues that go into racism, and why Black people might be violent towards each other. And so I'm really condensing this down to a short conversation, but I encourage you guys to look it up about Dr. Amos Wilson. One takeaway here is that the dominant white society tells African Americans all these reasons why they should hate themselves. So, and that, it's almost like this mesmerizing, hypnotizing technology. Like, it's so permeated in society, all these reasons why they should not value themselves. And if you hate yourself for a list of reasons, you're going to probably hate people who are like you. If you hate yourself for a list of reasons that someone has beaten into your head, you are going to also hate people who are like you. Then your aggression is focused on people who are like you rather than the people who are actually causing you harm. So the people who make up these lies about you use your aggression as evidence of your nature. So these white cops who are part of this group, Cyclops, who are hypnotizing these Black people in the theater, are looking, look at their violence. Look at how violent they are, even against their own people. Look how horrible they are. Look at that. It's just part of their nature. It is like mass institutional gaslighting, which is twisting reality, twisting the truth, so that you're not sure what is real, what is false anymore, making you actually question your own sanity. So moving on to Will, back to Angela. So Angela says to one of her adopted children, the world isn't rainbows, it's black and white. And I think that's kind of an interesting choice of words there. It's commentary that she knows that the world isn't inclusive. She knows that the world is based on these in-groups and out-groups. Social psychology talks a lot about you have these in-group, and your in-group is groups that you identify with. Out-groups are the groups that you're not a part of. So in-groups have, whatever kind of bonds that hold them together. And then they look at these out-groups, and they come up for a variety of reasons. And we have all kinds of theories that explain why, but why the out-group is necessarily bad. So she's saying that the world isn't inclusive. It's based on these in-groups and these out-groups. Still, even after knowing that one of her closest friends and one of her co-workers, her heroes, are racist, she continues to be a cop. And it's kind of similar to these politicians who go into the cavalry to keep the peace. And this obviously isn't believable. They're in the cavalry because they're racist and they want power. But they're trying to justify it with, I keep the peace. So there's an element of Angela thinking that she can do the most good by working in an imperfect system. And I think that comes up where, people complain about police brutality and acts of racism that are committed by police officers, and then other people try to counter that with, well, then if cops are so bad, and if it's such a bad group, and there's obviously all of these problems and it's racist, why do Black people become cops? And they're ignoring the thing of, well, we do need police officers. A society does need police officers. We need people who do actually keep the peace. And people want to make change, and it's hard to make change outside of the system. So it is understandable why some people would join a group that they don't maybe 100% agree with. Or maybe they're like Will and they do trust in the law. But they want to do good from the inside. So Angela's had, speaking to that and why she would want to be a cop still. But Angela went to a home for girls after her parents were killed. It's something like a workhouse, kind of like an orphanage. And police officer caught her parents' killer. The killer also was covered in a mask and a hood. So very, very similar to the Klan catching people and covering them in a hood. The cops also covered the suspected murderer in a hood, which was wild. But anyways, she felt like justice was done. And this led her to want to be a cop. Cops were the only ones who found her parents' killer and did something about it. And from there, her life is a series of tragic events. She sees police officers as the only ones who actually get something done. Her parents, her grandmother, she was shot. She loses the chief literally, and she also loses the chief figuratively when she finds out he's a closeted racist. But she doesn't deal with the hurt except by putting on a mask, which allows her to use violence to express her anger. And earlier I was saying, you can't heal under a mask. A mask doesn't work like a Band-Aid. You can't cover up the wound, wait a while, then uncover it, and it's magically healed. No. It delays the healing. What's kind of interesting, and I'm going to talk some more about it in a second, but Angela came up with her Sister Night persona from what is called a blaxploitation movie. So this movie, B-rated movies that have black actors in them, and I don't think they actually get paid or recognition for being in the movies, and it kind of makes fun of black people and culture. But that's where she gets her persona from. Very similarly, her grandfather, Will Reeves, he took his name, Reeves, from the character who was in the movie that he watched during the massacre. So there's kind of this there's a mirror image going on between Angela and Will Reeves. And getting to that, there's these themes, these repetitive themes in the series of intergenerational trauma. So, getting at this mirror image, in when he was a vigilante, Will pretended to be white, and he covered up his eyes with makeup to make it seem like he was white. And then Angela, when she becomes Sister Night and puts on that persona, she actually makes her skin darker when she wears her mask or her hood. So in the same way that her grandfather took his hero's name, Angela took her hero's name. At the end of this series, there is another massacre, and she is running into the theater, the same theater that Will was in the original massacre. And he's sitting there and he's waiting for her. And everything has become full circle. So there's this theme of this intergenerational trauma. And one technique, and it's an interesting technique that's used in family therapy, and it could also be in individual therapy if it applies, but it's to create what's called a family mapping. So it's kind of like a family tree, in that you say how everyone is related or whatever. And so it shows relationships, but you also include in it different people's stories, if you can kind of reduce it down to that. And it helps see the whole family system in a big picture way, and how oddly and kind of amazingly trauma or these stories replay themselves over generations, in the same way that kind of the same story replays itself from Will to Angela. There is a support group shown in this series, and this man says in it, and again, he's an African American man. He says in his support group, he talks about how his grandmother's fear has passed on to him, even though he hasn't experienced the trauma himself. So this is kind of an interesting area that has continued to be researched. People don't know everything about it yet. They're working on it. But how trauma can be passed on from generation to generation. So to kind of give you an idea of, what people are thinking or what they're researching, traumatic experience can literally change our biology. People who have post-traumatic stress disorder, or they've gone through these traumatic events, it changes parts of our brain and how it's functioning, especially with not just like really horrific trauma. And then if someone's biology is changed, it makes sense then that new structure, biological structure, could be passed down genetically. So then also trauma, having gone through trauma, leads to behavioral change. It changes the environment that we create for subsequent generations, which then affects their biology. So it's messy and it's difficult to tease apart. And again, it's an area of continued research. And I threw up a link there if you wanted to look more into it. I think it's a little, one-sided. There's some very obvious trauma that has happened with a particular group of Americans that isn't talked about in this article, and I think it's kind of a gross oversight, but it would give you a better idea of what I'm talking about here. So Angela takes what's called nostalgia, and it is people's memories that are put into pill form, and at this point in the show it's outlawed, but she takes it, and she takes her grandfather's nostalgia, so she's able to not only see his memories, but she's in his memories. She is Will, and these memories play out. And when she's coming out of this, and she's said that she has a recollection infestation, her brain or her memory is broken from taking so much of this nostalgia. She's told that she can't see her grandfather, and Lady Trudeau, who says this, says you wouldn't know where he ends and you begin. And I think that that's an interesting commentary on family there, especially with the lens of this intergenerational trauma. And I think also it's just, different cultures look at ideas of identity and family membership differently. Who am I in relation to my family, in relation to my family history and the things that my family has gone through? How have I created my identity based on some of that? So where do I truly begin and where does my family end? And some people, depending on your culture, it might not be important for you to tease that apart. Another character that I kind of wanted to talk about is Laurie, and Laurie comes from, again, the graphic novel. She was also Silk Spectre. Not the Silk Spectre who I talked about previously, who was assaulted by a comedian. That was her mother. So in the graphic novel, Laurie becomes Silk Spectre mostly because her mother wants her to. She's being pressured into that. And then she has a relationship with Dr. Manhattan. I didn't really get the idea that she actually loved him or anything, but, you know, like, she has to stay with him because here is this walking atomic bomb and we don't want him to go off. So you're just going to kind of be there for him. So now in the series, she works for the FBI and she's pretty disillusioned with masked vigilantes. She's had a really, really bad life. And the thing is that in the book originally written by Alan Moore, she doesn't have a whole lot of identity. She doesn't really get an arc. She's just kind of there because they needed a woman to be there. And it's interesting. I like this scene where she's in like this Dr. Manhattan booth to call him up and tell him jokes, to reach out. These booths are for people to send these recordings, I guess, to feel better, which I thought was kind of a commentary about prayer. It was a very cynical commentary about prayer. But so she goes to these booths to tell him jokes, and she's telling him this joke, and this isn't the punchline, but one thing that she says in the line, or in the joke, she's describing these different heroes who are talking to God. They talk to God one by one. And then she gets through the last hero and there's someone else. But it's not a hero. It's a woman. And it's funny because technically Laurie was a hero. She was a hero. She was Silk Spectre. She wasn't really a hero. Like, she didn't have any powers. She didn't do a whole lot. She was just kind of there to look really good in spandex. That is the attention that she was given. Her character was given. So it's this funny commentary of, well, heroes, you know, a woman can't be a hero. If it's a hero, it's not a woman. They're somehow mutually exclusive. There's also a title of an episode in this series called If You Don't Like My Story, Write Your Own, which is kind of exactly what they did to Alan Moore. So Alan Moore's The Watchmen was very pertinent for its time in the 80s. It's seen as like one of the best graphic novels ever written. And honestly, like, some of the visual storytelling is incredibly good. But it is critiqued for how the women characters are written. And I think Alan Moore never really wanted a sequel to his work. He never really wanted other things to be done with Watchmen. He just wanted it as a standalone graphic novel. But people didn't like the way that he handled the women characters in his stories, so they wrote their own. And they wrote Laurie into, you know, a pretty cool character. She's not just strong and forceful and funny and interesting, but now she's also lonely, and she's dealing with that loneliness now. So I said I was going to talk about Wade. Lookingglass, he wears this reflective mask, causing a similar effect to the Rorschach mask, except this time the projection test is yourself. What is your gut reaction when you're looking at yourself? So his backstory actually takes place during the Watchmen time when Veidt kills 3 million people. And during all of that, he screams at himself. He is misled by this woman who takes him into a fun house and seems like she's going to hook up with him, but doesn't. She just steals his clothes and runs off, and he's left there just naked in a fun house, and he starts screaming at himself in a looking glass for being dumb and a sinner. And now he's a cop, but he became a cop only after this White Night incident when the cavalry goes into the houses of a bunch of cops at night and shoots them, and afterwards they're allowed to wear masks or cover up their face. So why wasn't he a cop before that? And he answers that he wasn't a cop before all that because it wasn't until after that justice needed to be applied. But a lot of justice really did need to be applied. Like, bad guys happened before the cavalry came into people's houses and was shot up. But something about wearing a mask and being able to hide enticed Wade to become a police officer. So now he's a police officer. He's Lookingglass. That's his persona. He watches people. He's able to pick up on body language. He can tell if they're lying. He runs this interrogation pod, flashing these American images during an interrogation. It ends on a Rorschach image. And so he asks these what's called bias questions and watches people's physical responses to these images to tell whether or not they're lying or if they're trying to have something to hide. Laurie calls the pod a racist detector. So Wade is the one who runs that, which is very interesting. Why him? Maybe he's invested, I think, in learning how to tell when people are lying so that he's not fooled again. He was lied to before, and he was caught with his pants down. So all of his security measures, his mask, which is supposed to block out psychic energy, all of his alarm systems that he has, his fallout shelter that he has, could be seen as not wanting to be fooled again. His mask, we talked about the different sides of a mask, is literally protection. He wears his mask at home. He wears it at his fallout shelter. He's traumatized from this blast event that supposedly happened, and his mask is supposed to block a psychic blast. So he doesn't just wear it because he's hiding his identity from the cavalry who wants to hurt police officers. He wears it to protect himself from a possible psychic blast. But he's fooled again and captured by the cavalry because of a woman. And again, like Will Reeves, his story became full circle. Wade's story went full circle. He's caught with his pants down again, just not literally this time. So he's still afraid of the psychic blast, even after finding out the truth, even after finding that it didn't actually happen. And he leads this extra dimensional anxiety support group. That's a support group that the one gentleman was talking about, his grandmother's trauma and how it has been passed down to him. So Wade has what psychologists refer to as some emotional intelligence. So there's this theorist, Howard Gardner, who theorized that, there's not just one type of intelligence. We have different types of intelligence. And one of it is emotional intelligence. Not only being able to tell, what's going on with other people and how they're feeling, but maybe also being able to understand your own feelings and how, how you're dealing with that and being able to interpret them. So he has this emotional intelligence that helps him help others in this support group. And also read body language for lies and how to tell if someone is getting nervous or stressed out or hiding something. And he's asked, why isn't everyone petrified about aliens falling out of the sky? So like in the show, I guess this thing that Veidt did, it killed like 3 million people, that happened in the original Watchmen graphic novel, was that he just dropped this giant squid, on New York, and there supposedly was like psychic blast energy that caused people to just die. And now to kind of keep that charade going, Veidt just dumps a bunch of tiny squids randomly somewhere in the world. So people will be driving along, and then squids will just fall out of the sky. They stop their cars, and they just do their windshield wipers, and then it stops, and then they move on with their day. And Wade is asked, why isn't everyone petrified? Why do people act normal when baby squids are just falling out of the sky, and then they dissolve? And then that's just our new normal? The thing is, people can get used to anything. Ongoing trauma has its ongoing effects, even after you get used to it, but people can get used to it. And what I mean by that is that sometimes if you're in a traumatic situation or an abusive situation for a long period of time, that trauma, that abuse is your normal. Not that it doesn't continue to have effects on you. Not that it's not continuing to be awful, but your body just kind of adjusts and it gets used to, like, this is the level of stress that I'm going to deal with constantly, which has some long-term physical effects on your body. But people adjust and they recalibrate, and now this horrible thing that keeps happening is our new normal, and we'll just carry on as if it's okay. The last thing that I want to talk about is kind of this relationship between Adrian Veidt and Dr. Manhattan. So Dr. Manhattan creates this paradise on a moon of Jupiter, Europa. He creates this paradise, and he creates these Adam and Eve like clones who just have this undying adoration for their creator, but he's unsatisfied with that. Basically, he made Adam and Eve, but he didn't give them free will. So he's unsatisfied with their undying adoration. So he lets Adrian run it. Surely a narcissist would be fine with undying adoration, but the thing is that for Adrian, it's boring. I didn't get into a whole lot with Dr. Manhattan in this panel, in this presentation, but his development to me kind of, this gets a little religious-y, but it's kind of like God and Jesus in the whole Judeo-Christian way. So he creates, he destroys, he leaves, but he comes back, but this time as a human. He's trying to masquerade that he's not actually Dr. Manhattan. He's Cal now. He's taken on this new persona. And technically, as Cal, Dr. Manhattan is wearing a mask. Which kind of made me think, maybe God was wearing a mask in stories when he came back as Jesus. And I think that's what the writers are trying to get at. They're trying to get at these kind of like bigger existential things, not just societal issues, but kind of like these existential questions. So the clones that Veidt put Veidt on trial, and that kind of made me think, like, if people put God on trial, this is what it would look like. And I think kind of like God, he gives no defense of his actions. So in this like existential way, people ask, if there's a loving God, why, whatever you want to call him, but if there is a loving God, why does he allow these things to happen? Why did the Holocaust happen? Why is there so much pain? And people ask these questions, but if there is a loving God, he gives no defense of his actions, much like Veidt doesn't. And I talked about the Gamekeeper, how he wears this mask to make himself more cruel. So the Gamekeeper is the first man that Dr. Manhattan made. And he is upset. The reason why he's the Gamekeeper and he's so bent on Veidt staying is because he's upset that Dr. Manhattan, his creator, his father, left. And he asks, why is heaven not good enough? His original creator left, so now out of hurt he keeps Adrian there. And I think at this point I started taking a step back and asking, why do we create these sort of larger than life, these mythical stories of good and evil and heroes and villains? And I think that we create these massive stories of heroes like the Watchmen or Superman or whatever heroes, or these fantasy epic level stories. I think we do that to work through these universal themes that we all can relate to. Like, if a supreme creator created the universe, then where are they? Why did they create a world with such pain? These questions that have no real answer. So instead of solving them, which we can't, we create stories ourselves. We become creators ourselves, and we use them to work through our own existential questions. So at the beginning, of this presentation, I mentioned that Carl Jung thought that we all wear masks or personas to hide or protect our real selves in society. He also termed the idea of the collective unconscious, and that is this idea that there's this universal human experience. And kind of like how individually our anxieties sort of come out in our dreams, maybe it's kind of like hidden in certain things, like, oh, I had a dream that my teeth fell out, so I must be anxious about something else going on. Kind of like how we interpret dreams like that. Our universal, Carl Jung thought that our universal human anxieties come out in our stories. And we kind of see that with some of the existential questions that are brought up with Dr. Manhattan and with Veidt in this HBO series. So I'll leave you on that really deep note. Existential crises and universal human emotions. I'll leave you with that, and thank you guys again for tuning in for this panel. I appreciate your attention and your listening and being interested. Let MomoCon know how much you appreciate the work that they're doing to put on this Twitch stream for us. If you want to find out more about what I do, you can check out my website at superpsych.com, or find me on social media. I'm on Twitter. I have a Facebook page, and I'm on Instagram, and I love interacting with people. I love talking about comics and superheroes, video games, anime, whatever you guys want to talk about. I enjoy just getting into stuff. And you can find my book also on Amazon. Again, thank you guys so much for listening, and please stay safe.